Hey everybody, my name is Banner Driskell. I am the founder of Rhynestone Productions. Rhynestone Productions is a music company that helps musicians create music that turns heads. And today I really want to get into something that's really important to me, which is the podcast. And I wanted to thank you guys because the podcast has hit over 1 million impressions between all of our clips, all of our videos, all of our full-length podcasts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the top 10 lessons that I've learned that I think will turn you into a better musician, a more productive musician, and most importantly, a more successful musician. Tip number 1 comes to us from Ella Feingold, Adam Levy, and Simon Phillips. And that tip is to play along to records. Now, if you're like me, you went to music school, you took lessons, one of the things you always hear is you got to practice these exercises or these etudes, or you got to practice scales and music theory. And while that stuff is important, it's nowhere near as important as playing along to records. What this is going to teach you is how music actually works. And while you can learn the technical things, if you don't know how to apply them in a real musical context, it's actually not really that useful. And that doesn't really happen if you just sit around practicing with a metronome all day. So even if you have a technical exercise like, 3-note per string scales, try to play it over a DMX beat or try to play it, over Van Halen. It's going to serve you so much more to learn how to use it in a real musical context instead of just a structured, kind of rigid way of playing with like a metronome, for example. Lesson number 2, everyone is miming their content. Now, this lesson came to us from 2 different guests. Number 1 was Jan Hunter Jr., and the number 2 was Moshi Bass, our very first podcast episode. Everybody is faking their content, and what they're actually doing is they are recording their music separately and then recording a video for that content later. So it seems maybe like you're going 1 step backwards, but you're actually going 3 steps forward because you actually have more control over the video making process or the music making process. So you don't feel stuck like, oh, I got that perfect take, but the camera wasn't rolling. Really makes content creation a lot easier, in my opinion, especially when it comes to music. Lesson number 3 comes to us from Smash Mouth's Greg Camp and from Simon Phillips, that demos are becoming more and more and more useless. It's much better to actually just go in and just record the song as is. Back in the day, demos actually had a lot more use since high quality recording equipment was really hard to come by and studio time was super expensive. So recording demos to solidify your song ideas was really important. But nowadays, it's so easy to get great tones, it's so easy to get great drum sounds, it's so easy to get great vocal takes that you should honestly just skip the demo phase altogether and go into creating your song. It's going to actually save you a lot of time and make things a lot more efficient in your workflow. Tip number 4 comes to us directly from Canadian legend Rick Emmett himself, and that is that set lists should be determined by the vocalist. Now, back in the day when I was in the band, we used to build the set list in such a way that it would start and crescendo and just get bigger and have a story arc to it and things like that. And, it was good, but when you start getting into 90-minute sets, 2-hour sets, it's actually not an efficient method. What's actually more important is making sure your vocalist doesn't give out and die because they sang the first song incredibly well and they have to sing another banger right behind it. It does not matter how great the drummer is, does not matter how great the bass player is. If the vocalist's voice goes out in any way, the show is going to be a disaster. And if you don't believe me, go look at some bands from the 70s and 80s who are trying to tour today and have an off night and look at the comments. People rip them apart, even though the rest of the band is playing their butts off. So what you should do instead, and what Rick Emmett advises, if you're going to have a song where you have some screeching high notes, you need to put easy songs before it, you need to put easy songs after it, and you need to make sure that there's space for your singer to recover so that they're not just hitting all these crazy high notes over and over again, song after song. Because even if they can do it for 1 gig, there's not really a good chance they're going to do it for 30 nights in a month or 200 shows a year or something like that. Lesson number 5 comes to us from Cartoons and from Simon Phillips, and this is a lesson that I've really had to embrace the last several years, and I've just seen my music career flourish because of it. And that is, you're going to be holding down several different jobs. If you think you're just going to be a guitar player, or you think you're just going to be a singer, or you think you're just going to be an engineer, you're not going to work nowhere near as much as the person who's a bass player, engineer, arranger, composer, sync producer, vocal coach. Those are the people who win again and again and again in the music industry. Cartoons told us that he holds up to 8 different jobs on different sessions because he was the guy that says, yeah, sure, I'll do that. He didn't even know how to do some of the jobs, but he just said, I'll figure it out. There's YouTube. Simon Phillips is not only one of the world's greatest drummers, he's also an incredible engineer. He's also an incredible arranger. He's also an incredible songwriter. If you think you're just going to be a musician who just plays guitar or just sings or just producing or mixing, you're really going to miss out because the people who really succeed are the ones that have 7, 8, 9, 10 different jobs in the music industry. Tip number 6, this one blew my mind, and I cannot believe how effective this is at making better music for you. This tip came from us from cartoons, and it's just so brilliant, and it's just maximized my recording process. And that is to start with the drums with every recording. So if you're recording a song or you're putting a riff down on Pro Tools or whatever you're doing, put the drums down first. Even if it's a drum machine and you're going to put real drums later, it actually establishes a feel so much quicker, which actually leads you to play better and gives the people a much better idea of how the song should work and how the song is composed. I couldn't believe how well this worked. I started putting drums first for my demos, and people get the songs so much quicker when I show that to them. What I would highly recommend doing is downloading a free drum library. There's some great ones from Spitfire, which I'll link to here, the Spitfire drums, and start just putting drums down first. Even a basic drum beat will do you so much good when you're putting down riffs, you're putting down vocals, things like that. We're still recording, baby. They ain't shutting us down. Just want to tell you guys right quick, if you have not subscribed to the channel, I would really appreciate it. As we get bigger and bigger and bigger, these numbers do matter to get better and better guests. And even though we've had over 1 million impressions, right now we're stuck at about 930 subscribers. Now that number is growing by the minute, but it's really important that you hit subscribe if you are a fan of this channel. Now, if you're not a fan of this channel, don't subscribe. But if you have been enjoying the things I've been telling you, please subscribe. It actually does make a huge difference. And I just can't wait to give all this information to y'all and get y'all in and learn from the greats that have made music before us. All right, tip number 7. This one came to us from a lot of different places. It came to us from Jan Hunter Jr. It came to us from Tommy Emmanuel. It also came to us in our Sync Beast episode where we talked about sync licensing and sync music. And that is, you gotta study great music. Now, does this mean you should just study songs that you like and only you like? No, you should study what the 100 greatest songs of all time are. There's a great Rolling Stone list where you just go down and see what are the common factors of different genres. What are the common factors of great songs? What do great hooks sound like? What does great production sound like? What do great vocal takes sound like? If you don't know what great music sounds like, how are you going to know when you've written something amazing? Even if you don't like that kind of music, maybe you don't like Celine Dion, you should know why Celine Dion is one of the greatest selling artists of all time. If you don't like ABBA, you don't like Chappell Roan, you don't like Lady Gaga, whoever, you should still study them and figure out why do people like this so that you can take those tricks and put them in your own production or maybe in someone else's production when you're producing them. This is such an essential skill, and it's one that I think really makes a big difference when it comes to working with other musicians. Lesson number 8, and that is your attitude. This lesson came to us from Greg Howe. It came from us from cartoons. It came to us from Ella Feingold. It came to us from Tommy Emmanuel. Everyone over and over and over said that it is much more important to have a great attitude and to be a good hang than it is to be the world's greatest musician. I don't care if you can play 1,000,000 notes per hour or play giant steps backwards. What's way more important is that you're just a good person to be around, that you can carry a conversation, that you're not just Debbie Doomsday over here. In the world of 2025, people are not putting up with jerks and rock star diva attitudes anymore. There's someone just as talented who's got a better attitude who's going to take that job from you. Tip number 9 comes from two of my favorite musicians in the world, bass legend Michael Mannering, and again, Ella Feingold. That Ella Feingold podcast is such gold. You guys should go check it out. I'm going to link to it again here, and I'll also link to it down below. Rhythm is the most important skill as a musician. It does not matter how high you can sing. It does not matter how loud you can play the drums. It doesn't matter if you have the best gear in the world. It does not matter if your daddy is the owner of the Rockefeller Empire. I don't care. The most important thing of getting a job in the music industry is your sense of rhythm. So you see these musicians on Instagram and TikTok and places like that and YouTube. Yeah, they can sing really high, and yeah, they can play drums really fast, do these crazy patterns. But are you really going to pay money to hear 90 minutes of that? Probably not. What you really want to do is make sure you have a solid sense of rhythm and you have a way of making people connect with your music by playing the simple stuff right. One of the things that we brought up in the Michael Mannering interview that I think was really interesting is that music schools don't really teach rhythm in an effective way. You can learn about theory, you can learn about scales, you can learn about arranging, you can learn about conducting, but there's not really a collegiate way to get better at rhythm that says, all right, you start here, you get better at here. Now, I think this actually ties really well into our first tip, which is playing along with music. Real musicians speed up. Real musicians slow down. Real musicians get loud out of nowhere. Real musicians get quiet out of nowhere. And you need to learn how to follow those things. And you need to learn how to make music feel good, especially playing the simple parts. And the final tip, tip number 10, this is one that I think is really, really interesting. And it comes once again from the Ella Feingold podcast, but it also comes from Jan Hunter Jr. as well. And that is church, specifically black church, is the quickest way to get better at music really fast. So first, let me preface this tip by saying that I am not a religious person. I am what you would call an atheist. I really do not like religion. I really do not like church. That being said, if you want a quick way to have a gig every single week with musicians who are going to show up and musicians who are going to play, there's not really a better way than going to church every week. Now, black church is a little bit different than white church, for example, because black church tends to be a little bit more improvisational. It tends to be a little bit more about the feel, the music. It's long hours. You're learning how to jam. And that's why both Ella Feingold and Jan Hunter Jr. contributed massively to their success. But even still, if you're playing at a white church, playing Hillsong, things like that, it's still a gig every single week. Every Sunday morning, you are playing in front of people. It is a chance for you to get better, to learn how to groove with those musicians. And a lot of times, the musicians who are playing at church also have other gigs. And if they know you can handle a gig at church, they might hire you from other gigs. And there's always bigger and better churches that pay money even. So again, I really think this is an underrated hack. If you're a musician and you're just trying to get your feet wet, but you can't really find a band, get in a church, try to sub on a couple Sundays. I know I've played my fair share of churches, and it's a great way to get better as a musician. So that wraps up the top 10 lessons that I've learned from the Rhynestone podcast. What I would love to know are what are the things that you've learned from the podcast? And if something you haven't learned from the podcast, what is the best piece of musical advice you've heard? So whatever your best tips are, put them down in the chat below. And till next time, y'all.